Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Chicane Cafe. Grab your favorite beverage and join your hosts, Nadia and Ashley, this week while we dive into all things Formula One.
So this week we're changing gears. Nadia is unfortunately not able to make it, but we do have a special guest this week, Tyler McKenzie, who's going to sit in for Nadia. So for those that don't know, Tyler isn't necessarily as well versed in the Formula One universe as Nadia and I are, but Tyler is a great partner for me to take because she has this ability to ask really good questions and keep us honest and also be very transparent with how she feels about things. So
Yes,
he'll be a great guest.
it's a skill I have.
The thing that I wanted to talk about this week is that there was a special guest at the Formula One Grand Prix in Miami this weekend, and it was Donald Trump. He was invited by the CEO of Liberty Media and Formula One. So if you don't already know, Liberty Media owns Formula One. And then Formula One is actually governed by the FIA. There are two different entities. One is the regulatory and one is the ownership. From our understanding, the CEOs of Liberty Media did invite Trump to attend the race this weekend. However, what he was planning to do while he was at the race was he was planning to use his Paddock Club suite for fundraising purposes.
So he was pay his legal bills.
Yes.
Perfect.
So he was planning on charging people $250,000 a head.
Perfect. Affordable.
To sit in this Paddock Club suite with him during the Miami GP. Unfortunately for him, the FIA does not allow anything like that to happen. Fundraising, any sort of like monetary gain purposes at their own tracks. So they actually sent him a cease and desist. So if he wanted to attend, he was not able to do that.
He's very familiar with cease and desist.
Yeah. He's got a couple happening right now, doesn't he? In addition to this one?
At least one or two. Yeah.
Yes. So that was the big conversation even before he got to the track. So people were wondering if he was still going to attend because they said, hey, you can still attend, but you can't fundraise. And if we find out you are, your suite license will be revoked. Now, the other thing with Formula One and the FIA specifically, so the FIA being the regulatory body. You got it. You catch on so fast, T. The FIA actually is a non-political organization. And so which is very interesting because they won't let there be any political slogans, any sort of, again, political anything. Even some of the drivers that used to wear, like Lewis Hamilton wore like Justice for Breonna Taylor t-shirts, even they're not able to make political statements. So nobody.
Okay, interesting. Totally a different approach than other sports take. So interesting.
Yes. And this is where it becomes a little bit funny. And before the race even started, he visited the McLaren garage specifically. So the reason why I think he attended the McLaren garage is because Zach Brown, who's the CEO, is actually American. And he's one of the only American CEOs on the grid. So keeping it all very Trump-ish.
Very Trumpish. Very Trumpish. I'm sure he was wearing a MAGA hat and subtly making his political statement not political.
You're definitely onto it. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, perfect.
So at the beginning of the race, there was no political statements. No hat was on the head, shook the hands of everybody. But the request was made by the Liberty Media CEO that Trump visit the McLaren garage specifically, which is why I'm thinking it's because it was an American CEO.
Okay. Is Liberty Media American owned?
Yes, it is.
Okay. There you go. That explains the invite. Okay.
He visited the paddock pre-race. He visited the paddock after the race because Lando won, who was the McLaren driver.
Yes.
And there was a big uproar. Everyone was saying, McLaren, how dare you? How could you do this? But the question for me is actually, why was Trump still allowed to go to the race, even though he had this agenda in order to do his fundraising? Like that right there should have been an invitation
Right. Yes, I feel like that should inherently be an invitation, especially
Mhm.
since there was a cease and desist. So I feel like there must be a pretty significant disconnect between Liberty Media and the regulatory body that if I were the regulatory body, I'd be digging into, because if that ultimately is their stance on this, is no politics, no play, then I feel like that walked all over it. And I feel like you can't go anywhere these days without Donald Trump being political, fundraising or otherwise. The man is a walking billboard for his campaign. Also, isn't he really busy being berated by Stormy? Like, how does he pop off and have time to just show up at the race? But
That
that
was
would be
also
my
my
question.
thought. Yes.
That would be my question ultimately, is like, where is the disconnect? How come we're not drilling down on it? You know, in other sports, you get fined. Like, even the regulatory body would theoretically fine the CEO, like you do a team manager in basketball, football, whatever. So where's
Mhm.
the penalty for Liberty Media for allowing, inviting, and continuing this? That would be my really uneducated thought on this, but there we go.
I don't think it's uneducated. I think it's actually a conversation about following the money. And so, in doing a
100%.
little bit of digging,
Okay.
I actually found it didn't take a lot of digging. I found John C. Malone is actually the largest shareholder of Liberty Media. So he has the
Okay.
most voting rights. He
Yeah.
actually donated $250,000 to Donald Trump's inauguration.
Okay.
And the
Perfect.
CEO of Liberty Media, Greg Maffei,
Yeah.
also donated $250,000 to Trump's inauguration committee. And that's not even including the millions of dollars that they have additionally donated to Republican parties or Republican
Right. Hats, all
fundraising,
of the
or
above. Yep.
you got it. So that is the biggest disconnect. At the end of the race, Donald Trump was wearing his MAGA hat.
Of course he was.
But the worst part was the FIA, so to your point, the regulatory body, has not
Yeah.
even released any sort of press release to say, hey, we just want it to be very clear that we do not support, we're
Right.
non-political, blah, blah, blah. This was out of our control. But
Yeah.
they have released nothing with regards to that incident.
Did they get all up on top of the driver who wore the Justice for t-shirts? Were they equally kind of like mute, silent on this one? Or should they be loud and proud about the fact that they stand for non-political involvement in their organization? Because if there is a further disconnect, I would say that this is 100% playing to their audience and saying, we're not going to stand behind this the same way we do against something that may ruffle feathers. Instead, we're going to really play in a kind of a safe zone. I guess we're going to call it a safe zone by not making a statement at all.
To be honest, I think they almost have to be in that safe zone, sadly,
Yeah.
and say nothing at all, because what are they going to do? Formula One can, don't get me wrong, like there's so many things that could happen with this, but they could just
For
say,
sure.
hey, FIA, you're not our regulatory body anymore.
Donnie T on his big campaign for 2025. I know that you hate Donnie T. But his whole name is so gross that let's just shorten it.
But again, to your point, regardless of whether you're friendly or not, you can't have double standards. One thing I will say, though, is McLaren was put into a really, really awkward situation in terms of having to, meet and greet and shake hands. And the only reason I say it's awkward is because he's currently in the middle of a political campaign, right?
Yeah.
And a million lawsuits. And then here you have this very divisive political individual coming into the paddock, regardless of whether he's Republican or Democrat. It still puts this team in a very uncomfortable situation in terms of how to handle this, because he's such a divisive individual.
I was just going to say, because not all of their fans are going to play one way or the other. And because he is such a polarizing figure, it can create this moment where fans that do not support Donald Trump are like, you know what, I can't stand behind McLaren. And so that becomes a weird moment and really an unfair position that team is ultimately in, whether or not they're supporters of the Republican Party, of Donald Trump, of what he believes. It does put them in an uncomfortable position because ultimately they are the representative and the face of McLaren, and they may or may not be Trump supporters.
Like, I will say Zach Brown, the CEO, did not let on if he was, a supporter or not, but CEOs are put in these positions all the time, right? With regards to having to deal with difficult people you may not like, how to handle really challenging situations. So I will say that he did handle it very, very well. And they were saying that they were honored that they were chosen out of all of the teams.
Sure, which is theoretically fair, as long as they would have said the same thing with any candidate standing in that room. Ultimately,
it was just the thing that really blew my mind was when I was looking at the money and the financing, and I was just really asking myself, like, why was he still allowed to go? Like, that was the big question for me. And now that we've sat down to talk about this, and you have such great political knowledge, it really starts to make sense. But personally, I think the FIA could have done better in terms of, really separating themselves or distancing themselves from it. But I think they really did not do a great job of this time around.
Can I ask a random question about
Absolutely.
if other presidents or campaigning politicians have been invited previously?
Yeah, that's a great question. Previous presidents have gone to these events, but never someone who is currently on a campaign trail.
Okay. So sitting presidents have attended or been invited and attended, but never campaigning politicians.
Correct.
Okay. Interesting.
And campaigning politicians, if they have, I haven't read that they have, but we're not trying to exploit their presence at something like this. And to me, that was my second biggest issue.
Yeah, I think that, you think about all sorts of the campaign events that politicians go on, invited or otherwise. Ultimately, they're all campaign moments. They're all about fundraising, even if they're very subtle. But to be overt in your ask, overt in your planning, especially when that's not allowed, and obviously declaratively not allowed, right? This isn't a hidden rule. Then ultimately that becomes where the double standard exists. That becomes where they crossed over a line. That becomes where they should be held to account or explanation at the bare minimum to their fans and to the people that watch, and the drivers and the teams that support their own things and have been maybe chastised in the past for it. I feel like the FIA owes them the responsibility of a response to what happened.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks, T.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us this week at the Chicane Cafe. Follow us on Instagram at the Chicane Cafe. Our podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. And for a video version of our pod, watch us on our YouTube channel at the Chicane Cafe. And remember to hit that subscribe button.